Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. There's a common theme emerging. All roads are pointing to one culpable source of the catastrophe, BB. I'm not talking about Bridget Bardot, but Ben Bernanke. Stacey Herbert, please elaborate.
Yes, Max. We're going to talk about the root cause of our financial catastrophe being the chairman of the Command and Control Federal Reserve Committee. Greece impact small for U.S. banks, Bernanke. So this is Ben Bernanke speaking to the press. He says, we have asked the banks to essentially do stress tests and ask, looking at all their positions, all their hedges, what would the effect on their capital be if Greece defaulted? The answer is that the effects are very small.
All right, now this is going to be a recurring theme throughout this entire portion of our program, the fact that Ben Bernanke lies. I mean, this is the beginning of a lie because he doesn't mention the shadow banking system as it was described by former Prime Minister Gordon Brown. When he says that the effects are minimal, he's talking about the effects of what these banks report to regulators as being their balance sheet. But we know now, going back to 2008, that they simply don't report trillions of dollars of liabilities on their balance sheet, and then when these blow up, they claim that the market did it, we had no idea, and Bernanke knows this. That's why Bernanke, at the end of the day, because he's sheltering financial terrorists, he should be waterboarded.
I mean, he actually says there that even looking at the hedges, that this will be a small, negligible impact of Greece defaulting. But we know from the Bank of International Settlements' recent release that there's $159 billion in credit default swaps written by U.S. banks against the European sovereign debt holdings of Greece, Ireland, and Spain, and Portugal.
So again, he's lying. When he makes that statement in front of Congress, he is telling a gross lie that's causing incredible global financial damage. Again, I suggest waterboarding.
Okay, well, let's look at this video here. And this is Jim Grant being interviewed on Bloomberg News. And he's asked about Ben Bernanke lying to the audience there about monetary policy and the causes of it. And he mentions the money markets.
So the Fed has pushed interest rates to zero, right? It has flooded the system with dollar bills. Pity the poor saver who wants to get something, some little taste of interest income on his or her balance, so that they invest in money market mutual funds. The money market mutual funds, having nothing to do in this country because rates are zero, go to Europe. So money market mutual fund investors are taking quite ponderable risks for about a 0% return. They're yielding, these funds are yielding a few basis points only, but to get those few basis points, these funds are crossing the Atlantic right smack dab in the middle of the European banking crisis to try to pick up some measure of yield. This is a prime example of the unintended consequences of this massive intervention by our central bank.
That's right, and let's not forget that in 2008 there was a $5 trillion run on the money markets because they're totally exposed to this crisis. And as Jim Grant points out, the returns people are getting on their money markets are less than 0.1%. It's like trying to pick up nickels in front of a steamroller. Is that a good risk-reward ratio? No.
Jim Grant also points out that it's the Fed who's forcing these 0% rates. He's penalizing savers, he says. So the Fed is the one forcing people to lend more than is necessary to other countries who can't. They're forcing them to be predatory lenders for a little tiny nickel in front of a steamroller, as you say.
Right. The command and control concept is that the Fed is command and controlling interest rates and taking a position outside of the supply and demand of what people think is going on in America, free market capitalism. That's not what's going on. It's a command and control type economy of centrally planned bureaucrats like Bernanke. They are causing the global economy to collapse. Ben Bernanke is, in fact, the cause for Greece's problems because that's the model used by Trichet and the ECB and the Bank of England and the Bank of Japan. Again, I suggest waterboarding.
Okay, Max. So he's also saying that the Greeks are not the problem. It's not the people of Greece that caused this problem. It's the monetary system that is the principal agent. And the fact that this is true, you could see in the price of gold, he points to. So that takes me to the next headline. Greeks turn savings to gold, and Perth Mint silver coin sales surge to record on haven demand. So the Financial Times, this article points out, is reporting that Greek citizens are emptying savings accounts and buying gold as they brace themselves for the possibility of a sovereign default and a run on the banks. So sales of gold coins have soared in recent weeks as people are converting all their savings into gold.
That's right, gold and silver. And, you know, we were in Athens recently. We're making a new documentary down there and had a chance to speak before thousands of people. And I've been on the national television in Athens and translated into Greek. And the message to the Greek people is clear: to buy gold and silver to protect yourself against the financial holocaust provokers like a Bernanke. Remember back to the occupation days in 1939. Greece was occupied. Now Greece is being reoccupied by Bernanke and his central banking holocaust provokers.
Well, the one person interviewed in the Financial Times does say that he converted his entire savings to gold coins. He said, quote, "I keep them at home just like my grandmother did in the Second World War." So it is likened back to a global world war. But speaking of Holocaust, I guess the entire destruction of financial wealth, we have that in this next headline here, which also proves that Ben Bernanke is lying about the impact of a Greek default. Greek crisis could cost UK £336 billion. British exposure significantly underestimated. So the Bank of England alleges that, like Ben Bernanke, the UK banking system is just fine. The exposure to Greek debt is only £8 billion. But it has emerged that Britain could actually be hit with losses of £366 billion, which is equal to 24% of annual GDP. And this is based on complicated derivatives and insurance deals.
Right. Again, Mervyn King is Ben Bernanke's counterpart in the UK. He should be waterboarded as well. He is lying. He's talking about the risks to the economy in the visible economy, not talking about the hologram economy of credit default swaps that go bust due to the fact that they're manufactured in a faulty way. Part of the problem is, you know, if you had tainted meat and it was making people sick, you'd go and you'd do something about it, and hopefully there would be some redress. If you're buying toys that are painted with lead paint and they're making children sick, and you would have some redress. You would go to the manufacturer. Here the world is being flooded with faulty credit default swaps. These products don't work. They're completely incongruous with any notion of a capitalist system. They're used only to destroy as a weaponized financial instrument, as a credit default swap siege and blitz on these economy, causing financial holocaust as the result of this financial hologram.
Well, let's talk more about debt. Let's go back to the U.S. because there's a hysterical video here. This is an ad for a guy named Mark Omaday. He's running for Congress for Nevada.
As their debt grew, our fortune grew, and that is how our great empire rose again.
Well, he already is too late to the party. That already the Chinese came in through Walmart 10, 15 years ago, buddy. Where have you been?
He's talking about the U.S. debt being the cause of the wealth of China. But listen, isn't the U.S. doing the same thing to Europe? Aren't they occupying Greece at the moment in order that Greece doesn't default on their debt so that American bankers like Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein don't have to pay out on these insurance products that they haven't any reserves for?
That's right. It's a cause and effect problem, and this is propaganda, as we see in this TV commercial. Just like the problems of Greece ultimately come from Bernanke's loose monetary policies and corrupt monetary policies. The problems with China, as America perceives them, that they are quote-unquote currency manipulators, is also the result of America's loose monetary policies. America has the world reserve currency, and there's huge benefits when having the world reserve currency. If your economy starts to collapse because you've abused your privileges as for having the world reserve currency, don't blame people like China and Greece for your sins.
But let's look at what the state of the United States is. It looks like a land war already. Scrap yards are the new pawn shops. So remember, everybody was saying, oh, gold and silver are going to sink because everybody's going to the pawn shop and cashing in all their family silverware and stuff like that. Well, apparently they've run out of that. Now people are going around snatching copper wires from electrical transformers, actually taking the entire transformer, risking death.
Yeah, well, as folks rip up the copper, the zinc, and the lead that is the basis for the infrastructure that is the platform upon which the economy is operating. Of course, to satisfy that problem, the Fed will do what? They'll increase the money supply, which of course will drive the prices of lead, copper, and zinc ever higher, which will incentivize people to rip more of it out of the ground.
The other point here is, Max, that we're talking about, here's a congressman saying, oh, it's the Chinese who will invade us. And what do people do when they invade? What do nations do when they invade a country? They wipe out the infrastructure. We've seen the U.S. do that in Iraq. We see them doing it in Libya now. They wipe out the infrastructure. And what you're seeing here, a train derailed in Taunton, Massachusetts yesterday after thieves apparently used a blowtorch to steal two 8-foot, 900-pound chunks of solid steel track. So the American population themselves are at war because of Bernanke's crazy policies.
Yes, Bernanke is incentivizing American citizens to rip up their own infrastructure.
Yes.
Now, is that treason? Yes, it is. Where should he be? Guantanamo. What should he be experiencing?
And then one more thing, one more headline here, because I know we're talking to somebody in the oil speculation market, an expert on oil speculation. French president compares speculators to mafia. Once again, it goes back to the top of the show. Ben Bernanke is the cause. He's the root cause. The central banks are the root cause of the financial chaos around the world. And here, Nicolas Sarkozy is saying that it's speculators who are the mafia, not the guy who is causing people to speculate on oil and other products.
Yes, exactly. And the capo di capo ultimately is the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland. They're at the head of the mafia family. And then the Fed and the New York Fed and the ECB and Bank of Japan and Bank of England are regional mafia captains. And the techniques are the same. They'll lend money you can't possibly pay back, and then we don't pay back. They steal everything you got, and then they crush you with rampant inflation in food and energy.
Well, he blames financialization for bringing the world to the edge of a precipice. And it is true. I mean, that's part and parcel of the U.S. Federal Reserve System. It's the private bankers. It's Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein who are the Fed. And they've created this financialization as a way to occupy our economies.
And the people are now revolting. It's a global insurrection against Ben Bernanke occupation. All right, Stacey Hubbard, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. Much more coming away, so stay right there.
20 years ago, the largest country in the world disintegrated. What had been one became many, and each began a journey. Where did it take them?
Welcome to the future, bringing you the latest in science and technology from around Russia. We've got the future covered.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to New York and talk with Leah McGrath Goodman. She's the author of this gripping new book, The Asylum. If you haven't got your copy yet, I insist that you get it. It's all about the renegades who hijacked the world's oil market. And Leah, welcome to the Keiser Report.
Hi, how are you doing today, Max?
All right, so who are the renegades? How have they hijacked the world's biggest oil market?
These were the builders of the original oil market. Back in 1983, Reagan lifted oil price controls, and when that happened, some traders who had destroyed their own exchange, which had traded potatoes, this was called the New York Mercantile Exchange, decided they were going to try to trade oil. And when Reagan lifted those controls in 1983 that had been imposed by Nixon, they went ahead and did it. It was effectively the deregulation of the market. It became a true free market, not big oil setting prices or OPEC behind closed doors. This was when you had bids and offers that were freely exchanging hands, and that was the beginning of it all. And this is the oral history, really, of these traders. Instead of not knowing who they were, we know their names and we find out exactly what they were thinking, how it happened, all the way up to the present day.
Right. Now, at some point, Leah, what you call the transformation of the market into more of a free market system, away from the control of the oil companies and OPEC, at some point, another mutation occurred. This is when these markets started to become dominated by those folks who are gaming the system. When did that transition become apparent? And talk to us a little bit about that.
What's interesting is if you look at the history of this market, because we need fuel, it's the lifeblood of this world, oil and gas, this system has always been gamed. There have been different evolutionary iterations of how it's gamed, but often it's the same thing, and that is cornering supply or creating panic about supply running out to make a price go up, or dropping lots of supply to make the price go down. But really it's about being able to predict what's going to happen by, moving a few things around, really just pawns on the chessboard. And a lot of that is in terms of oil supply and perception of demand, and that is very much gamed, and it is to this day, and it was then as well.
But when you say predict which way things are going on, it's easier to predict which way prices may go if, in fact, you are manipulating prices, correct?
Yeah, some of the biggest players in this market own huge amounts of oil, own huge amounts of fuel, and we are not really allowed to know how much everyone has, but we do know that in Cushing, Oklahoma, where most of the oil is stored in this country, or rather it's the largest onshore oil storage facility in the world, this is a black box. We are not to know who owns oil there, who's doing what. There are a couple big companies, but they lease out tank farms to Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, large banks, large oil companies, and then these groups also trade oil. And it's very good to have the supply chip, right, and then as well trading in the paper market. But if you can put them together, you have a lot of that chessboard covered, and that's what a lot of these groups do.
Now, you talk about the '83 period and deregulation. There was, of course, another major wave of deregulation. I believe it was in 2000 when the Commodity Futures Modernization Act was passed. And how did this transform the market?
What this did was it codified. Congress literally voted to take away any anti-fraud powers that might have been implied by the regulator of the oil market, so that they could not do very much about the kind of trading that was going on off exchanges. While the exchanges do set the global, transparent global price, most of the trading actually takes place off exchange, and they just use the price set on the exchange as a way of pegging what they're doing. But at the end of the day, the big trades take place off exchange, and this basically made that arena, which is now worth about $600 billion a day, a free-for-all. And to this day, it's still free-for-all. What we're seeing now with the Dodd-Frank Act taking so long to be put into effect has a lot to do with the war between Wall Street and Washington over how are we going to rein in this thing when we threw away the key and shut the door.
All right, so this idea of price discovery, the idea of supply and demand meeting in the exchange and the resultant price setting the market has given way to price discovery happening off-market, and then what we see quoted on the exchange is actually just a kind of a shadow of what's really going on, and the forces that are really shaping the prices are completely invisible and unregulated. And as you just said, they took away the anti-fraud powers, which is to imply that there is nothing but fraud.
Yeah, if you want to look at the global price on the New York Mercantile Exchange for oil, it's like the tail that wags the dog. You want to look at it that way. It represents a small piece, but it's the only piece people can see. So let's say you and I are off exchange and we're making a deal. If you try to mislead me about price, I can say, hey, the NYMEX is trading at X today. You just offered me Y. You have that kind of thing. So it is used as a benchmark. But at the end of the day, the big trades take place off exchange, and this is where a lot of the gaming takes place. I don't know if you noticed that BP traders recently, who are now being pursued by the CFTC, this has been a 3-year in the making a group of charges, and yet why would it take 3 years to go after these guys? Well, because they were doing this over the counter. It is very hard to piece together what happened because there's really no paper trail.
Right, so over the counter, another way to say off market. And the BP scandal, of course, comes after the Enron scandal. And so the energy market has quite a history of this type of shadowy dealing. To what degree does the manipulation in the futures markets end up through the transmission of moral hazard, creating executives at oil companies who also are completely insensitive to committing fraud?
The biggest problem here is that it's still more rewarding to game the system. Buying into the culture of corruption is still more financially rewarding for you, whether you're a regulator, whether you're a politician, whether you're an executive in an oil company, or whether you're a Wall Street trader. If you engage this culture on the level it's now playing at, you are going to do better than if you don't. Those who stood up and resisted, and I talk a lot in the book about different people from different walks of life who tried to stop this out-of-control train, and they were broken just as badly as the system is broken, and it's very sad. And to this day, what's happening now is we see traders who didn't do anything wrong who are being prosecuted because the regulators are so defensive about not having done anything before, so they pick a fall guy, and vice versa. You see traders who feel that they're actually trying to make a better system, but they're not getting any help. I get letters from more traders than anyone else saying disaster awaits, this can't go on, price discovery is broken.
Okay, well, in order for all this market manipulation to go on and all this huge volume of trading to happen off-market, over-the-counter, it requires a lot of money to be borrowed from Wall Street banks. To what degree are CEOs like Lloyd Blankfein, Jamie Dimon culpable in committing massive fraud on the futures exchanges?
I would be very surprised if they don't understand how this works, but at the other end of the spectrum, Wall Street has been investing very diligently into creating the loopholes in this market, creating the legal openings to allow themselves to do these things. It's their best investment ever, is to be able to manipulate the financial system and be able to do it legally, and that is what we're seeing, and we're trying to fix that now. But when you've done this for decades, when this has been going on and if you look at the history since the Great Depression of the loosening of the rules and the chipping away of the regulations, it's a very long sordid path that we're going to have to cross over again to fix it. And in the meantime, many people will try to present it as hurting business. And in a way, it is hurting business, but if business is corrupt, then it shouldn't be allowed to thrive.
Well, let me ask the question this way. If you take a major Wall Street bank and you were to eliminate all the trading profits gleaned through corruption, what percentage of their profits would remain?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define corruption. Unfortunately, a lot of things that might have been considered corrupt before the 1990s are no longer considered in our regulatory and legal system corrupt.
Well, let's define corruption as a false price signal generated through market manipulation. We just agreed that most of the price signals coming out of the system are in fact false or corrupt. If the prices were to represent true supply and demand and not fake supply and demand, how much of profits would be impacted on these major Wall Street banks?
Their profits would be impacted enormously if these rules were to change and to make it much more honest. And that is why you see this battle going on and on. That's why you see, when was our financial crisis, right? We start to see things happen in 2006. It came to a head in 2008. And here we are. It's going to be summer of 2011. And we haven't done anything that's made any material difference. And we're not going to. If we haven't now, we're not going to.
Okay, there is one industry, however, that has done something. Just last year, Cantor Fitzgerald was going to launch box office futures contracts. They were shot down. The Motion Picture Association of America went to Washington and got Washington to outlaw box office futures contracts, correctly asserting that it would destroy their industry. So how come people who are being destroyed with the gas price manipulation, oil price manipulation, commodity price manipulation, can't get a lobbyist for them to go to Washington to save them from the financial terrorists?
Well, it's a sad fact that the lobbyists are strongest for those who have money. And consumers aren't united enough and moneyed enough to fight this battle. So oil, gas, corn, soybeans, all that continue to be traded. Anything that we might need to eat or just to survive continue to be traded in the futures market, and the bar is very low. I mean, if you're a day trader in this market, you don't have to put any money down to trade, not a cent. And when you're talking about Hollywood, these are people who are very aware of the effects of futures on the price and the value of something. And you're going to see a lot more battles going on for those who are trying to commoditize things like movies, like box office receipts. We're going to see a lot more pushback because the cat's out of the bag that this is not fundamentally a good thing. How do you decide how speculators should be governed? That has to be a discussion we have, but certainly they need to be governed better.
One last question. The flash crash in natural gas, 8% drop in seconds. It's being blamed on high-frequency trading. Energy markets are now being co-opted by this new kid in town, high-frequency trading. What's happening here?
Well, I guess we're seeing a lot of cases where the equipment is superior to the operator, but that being said, these systems have a great deal of power. I don't know if you remember in '09, but there was a Russian-American computer programmer who was apprehended. You probably covered this, Max. And Goldman Sachs literally engaged in a manhunt, and the U.S. Assistant Attorney here in New York said Goldman systems can easily manipulate stock and commodities prices, and this trader had, or rather he was a quant, he was a programmer, he had taken some of the code and he had quit and he was presumably starting a job somewhere else. Goldman was so upset that they went after him very publicly and also risked exposing their own computer programming. And it was not good for Goldman. It wasn't good, obviously, for the programmer. But at the end of the day, it exposed that these systems are very, very dangerous, and they're also very expensive, but they give a huge edge to banks like Goldman. And that was revealed, and we moved on. What's amazing is our own law enforcement didn't find it alarming that Goldman had systems that could manipulate our markets. They found it upsetting that a programmer walked away with the code. Okay,
well, the book is called The Asylum by Leah McGrath Goodman. It is a must-read. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report, Leah.
Thank you, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Leah McGrath Goodman. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.